Did you know that Zimbabwe once experienced hyperinflation so extreme, prices doubled every single day? Today, we're diving deep into the fascinating and often turbulent world of African economics, visualized. We're going beyond the headlines to explore the hidden patterns and untold stories behind the continent's economic ups and downs. Using data from 1860 to 2014, we'll uncover the root causes and long-term impacts of economic crises across 13 key African nations. Our journey is primarily powered by the African Economics, Visualizing Banking and Systemic Crises project, a remarkable data set built using the Reinhardt-Rogoff dataset. This allows us to track everything from banking collapses to runaway inflation, painting a detailed picture of financial instability. The 13 countries covered are Algeria, Angola, Central African Republic, Ivory Coast, Egypt, Kenya, Mauritius, Morocco, Nigeria, South Africa, Tunisia, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. This data reveals that between 1860 and 2014, the continent experienced over 200 distinct economic crises. Think of South Africa's systemic banking crisis in the 1980s, Nigeria's inflation soaring past 50% in 1995, and of course, Zimbabwe's mind-boggling hyperinflation in the 2000s. The visualizations, created using the Seaborn Python library, transform raw data into easily understandable heat maps and timelines, giving us a unique perspective on these events. But what about more recent trends? The World Bank's 2024 Africa Pulse report indicates that sub-Saharan Africa is projected to grow at 3.5% in 2024. This number is expected to climb to 3.8% in 2025, and reach an average of 4.4% between 2026 and 2027. However, external debt service is also on the rise, reaching 2% of GDP in 2024, doubling what it was just a decade ago. Now, let's delve into some lesser-known details. Take the Central African Republic, for instance. Between 1978 and 1994, this nation endured an astonishing 8 overlapping crises, including debt, inflation, and systemic failures. This period of intense instability was largely linked to the post-independence coups under Jean-Bedel Bokassa. On the other end of the spectrum, we have Mauritius. This island nation stands out as a remarkable outlier, having recorded 0 systemic crises between 1860 and 2014. Its success can be attributed to the establishment of an export processing zone in 1970 and its strategic shift from sugar to textiles after independence in 1968. These policies fueled annual growth rates of 7 to 10% in the 1980s, transforming Mauritius into Africa's top per capita GDP nation by 2014. Zambia's story is one of a hidden debt trap. The collapse of copper prices in the 1980s triggered a debt crisis that lasted until 1994, with inflation peaking at a staggering 190% in 1993. Adding insult to injury, the IMF structural adjustment programs in 1985 led to the privatization of over 200 state-owned firms. Yet, a significant portion of Zambia's copper production was smuggled out of the country, evading official data and further destabilizing the economy. Nigeria also had its share of economic woes in 2009, a banking crisis saw 10 out of 24 banks fail, burdened by $12 billion in non-performing loans. This crisis was triggered by a sharp drop in oil prices, plummeting from $140 per barrel in July 2008 to just $40 in December 2008. Small and medium-sized enterprises, the backbone of many African economies, face unique challenges. A 2024 UNCTAD report reveals that 32% of African SMEs cite access to finance as their biggest barrier in 2023. Currency volatility adds another layer of complexity, increasing costs by 15 to 20% for import-reliant firms in Nigeria and Kenya. How have these economic crises shaped the course of African history? A staggering 70% of crises occurred after the wave of independence movements in the 1960s. Visualizations reveal a recurring twin crises pattern. For example, Angola's debt and inflation crises during its 1980s civil war cost the nation approximately 15% of its GDP annually, hindering diversification away from oil. The period between 1982 and 1994 is often referred to as the lost decade, marked by widespread debt crises across the continent. African external debt surged from $60 billion in 1980 to $300 billion in 1990. Egypt's default risk in 1984 even triggered a US $1 billion bailout in 1987, tied to the Camp David Accords. Hyperinflation is not a new phenomenon in Africa. Zimbabwe's 2008 hyperinflation, though extreme, had precedents in Zambia's 1993 crisis and Angola's 1994 crisis. These examples show how dependence on commodities like tobacco in Zimbabwe and oil in Angola can amplify economic shocks. Critically, these crises reduced average GDP growth by 2 to 3% annually between 1970 and 2010, compared to global peers. South Africa's apartheid-era isolation, while containing crises domestically, fueled regional spillovers, such as Zambia's refugee influx in the 1980s. What does the future hold? While some countries are projected to experience rapid growth, these gains may be fragile. The World Bank notes that 73% of employment in Africa is in the informal sector, highlighting the vulnerability of small firms. The African Continental Free Trade Area, launched in January 2021, could unlock a $3.4 trillion market. However, historical crisis data underscores the need for greater stability. Intra-African trade remains low at 18% compared to 60% in Asia, hampered by issues like inflation in Morocco and Tunisia. Debt pressures persist, with debt service reaching 2% of GDP in sub-Saharan Africa, echoing the challenges of the 1980s. Nigeria's $100 billion-plus external debt raises concerns about a potential repeat of the 2009 banking crisis. Yet, there are signs of resilience. Kenya's tech hubs, such as Silicon Savannah, have generated $1 billion in remittances, bypassing historical banking fragility. It's important to acknowledge the data gaps. The Reinhardt-Rogoff dataset omits pre-1860 colonial exploitation, potentially underreporting famines and inflation under Ottoman or British rule. The IMF and World Bank structural adjustment programs faced backlash for increasing poverty in the 1990s. The oil curse narrative often overlooks issues of corruption and revenue mismanagement, as seen in Angola. South Sudan's projected growth is viewed skeptically, given its high poverty rate and recent civil war. Finally, Zimbabwe's hyperinflation data was often suppressed, with parallel market rates far exceeding official figures. Africa's economic story is complex, challenging, and constantly evolving. By visualizing the past, we can gain insights into the present and strategize for a more prosperous future.